for that, you know? And there's this little thing, like it should be micro forgiveness, but it actually becomes a big thing. Like over time, it like slowly grows and it hinders my thoughts. And it hinders sometimes the ways that I view the world or hinders my actions with people. And I'll never forget, I was meeting with a counselor in my 20s, talking about some of this, and she goes, what you really need to do is you need to find a way to get unhindered, right? This was her like version of it. You need to feel unhindered when it comes to these like micro things. You got to let it go. Has anybody ever told you to let something go before? Has anybody else said that? Which is like the best and worst advice ever. Best meaning that's probably true, and worst meaning what? You know what I mean? Like how do you just let it? Like, no, that's not how it works. I don't just let it go. I don't know how to just let it go. And the problem is that even if it's small, and even if it's like a micro kind of thing, it restrains us and it holds us back. And so unhindered is really going, how do we live in a way where we don't feel like restrained or held back? Or you could say it this way, that you don't move slowly through certain parts of your life, right? Now, my son, he loves to do this. We were living in Michigan for a while, and I just got some shoes. It was the first pair of Jordans that I bought, and by that I mean probably one of only two pair I actually bought. Other people kind of gave them to me, and I'll never forget this. I bought these when I turned 30, and then he took them outside, and I'll never forget this. This is a picture of him outside. And he's wearing my shoes, and he looks like he's about to try to jump like Michael Jordan. Like, there's a little bit of this. And I'll never forget this. As he's walking, he's just, like, stumbling along, trying to, like, and he's more like gliding them on the ground, which is what you want to do when you buy a brand new pair of shoes. You get your kid outside, just dragging him on the ground. And he's walking. I'll never forget this. He's walking so slow and so stumbly, and it was like he was attached to these shoes, and they were, like, holding him, right? In the most cute, amazing, beautiful way, I looked at him going, if you had the same size shoes that you needed, you would be running around helplessly, aimlessly, breaking everything in our yard. But with mine, you move significantly slower. You are restrained. You are moving at a weird pace. There's something about it that just doesn't feel quite right, but he's real cute, though. And I remember thinking this, it's a little bit like that. It's not that you can't walk, but you walk slower. It's not that you can't move through your life. It's just that you're a little bit hindered by it. It's not that you don't love people, but you just don't trust like you used to. It's not that you don't lead the same way. You do, and at the same time, you're also a little hesitant in your leadership. It's not that you don't love your spouse anymore, but all of a sudden, it's like, can I trust you with this part of my heart? It's not that you got betrayed by a friend or a family member. It's that, you know what, I've moved through that, but now I just don't know what to do. I just don't know how to quite navigate those moments. And so the question for you, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time today, is like, what holds you back and what restrains you? Now, some of you immediately had like a thing. Like you knew exactly what your thing was. As soon as we started talking about this, you knew the person that you were going to forgive. And some of you are very good at this. I'm good at this too. I can immediately check out. And what I'll do is I'll know who it is that I need to forgive, but then I'll start thinking about other people and how this is a great message for other people, but not me because I've already worked through it, you know? But generally, as soon as we talk about this and you see these questions, a name pops in your head, or a situation pops in your head, or a group of people pop in your head, or a family member, or your mom or your dad, or a cousin, or a close friend, or a once close friend, or a close friend, but it's a little bit weird now. You know, like those things pop in your head pretty quick, and you go like, why does that hold me back? Why is it that the pain that I experience and the lack of forgiveness have its grip on my heart still, or my mind, or my soul, or my leadership, or my kindness? Right, some of you know this. Some of you were kinder before you got hurt. And now it's not you're mean, but you're just a little bit more mean, right? You're just a little bit more triggered. You're a little bit more afraid. I'm not sure what to do with it. Now, this is an amazing quote. I love talking about this. I use this quote every single time I talk about forgiveness because I think it's so powerful. It's by Isabel Holland, and she says it like this. She says, as long as you don't forgive whoever it is that you need to forgive, who and whatever it is will occupy, can we say this together, a rent-free space in your mind. Anybody see that TikTok trend? I don't know, it was about a year ago. Like this lives in your head rent-free. Do you remember that? I love this. This is exactly what it is. Like it's like they're living rent-free in your head. That situation lives rent-free in your head. They're not staying up at night thinking about it. They're not wrestling through it anymore. They probably don't even know what they did. And there's a part of you that it's like gripped your heart. And the easy thing to do would be to say this, to say, hey, you just got to let it go. And I do think you should let it go to some degree, but there's also a part of it that goes, that's not it at all. Like, it's not about you just saying, and now I'm done, because you know this, you're not just done. And as much as you can convince yourself and work to convince yourself that I'm just like, poof, let it go, it doesn't feel like that in the moments when it bubbles up. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at an area of the Bible called Romans today. And the passage we're going to look at is written by a guy named Paul, who's phenomenal, just a phenomenal story about how he was, not a follower of Jesus, came in a miraculous way to Jesus. He was extraordinarily intelligent, likely spoke multiple languages, incredibly educated. And I laugh about this. You think about like business models and sort of things. He essentially franchised the church all over the ancient world. I mean, all of these places popped up, and he would write these letters to all these different churches about here's the things that you probably should tweak. You guys over there, y'all are nuts. Stop doing that. All these beautiful pictures, and then he would reveal through his language and his words who Jesus is and how we're to live and be in the world as people who are followers of Jesus. And so in this particular passage, he's talking about love and how we interact with each other, and in the guts of it, he honestly says something that, if I'm fully transparent, I wish didn't exist here in the text the way that it does. But in Romans chapter 12, here's what it says. It says, love must be sincere, which I think we would all agree with, right? You can't really fake this. This is just, it is or it isn't. Love must be sincere. And then you get like the strong language around this. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Now, hate is one of those weird words, especially in the Greek text here, where it doesn't just mean like I'm angry at. Like, it literally means to like almost to stand against something else. I hate in a way where I stand against this thing. You are hating, or you are standing against this thing that is evil, and at the same time, I am clinging with everything in me to those things that are good. And then he goes on. He says, so love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. And then he says this, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourself. And again, this is the part where I go, this is really great to people who haven't hurt me. This is really great to people that I'm not upset with. This is really great to people that I naturally and easily love. That's really easy and great. But be devoted to one another in love, and then honoring above yourself is hard. Now, I'll tell you, I think one of the best moms in the whole world. She's unbelievable. My mom taught me about honor early on when I was a kid, and I don't know if she was worried about me getting married one day, but she just made this a big deal in our house. So when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, I opened the door for every woman that was around. You know what I mean? Like, and then I started opening it for men too, because I want to make sure I was good on everything. You know what I mean? I opened the door for everybody. Honoring people, it was a big deal in our home. Like, we would talk about this. We had a big sense of hospitality for us, and so if people came over, we wanted to honor people. And I'll never forget this. This was a great thing until I got really competitive. Do we have any of you in the room who are competitive? Like, you're just naturally This is true. Jack, this is the book about it, yeah. And he would beat me at everything. That's also great. Right, but when I got competitive, I thought about this. Honor was something that was applied to anybody that I wasn't competitive with. And then in those moments, honor I threw out the window. I was the kid who got ejected from basketball games. Some of y'all didn't know that. You're going to learn a lot about me today. Anyway, I was a kid. I would talk so much smack in these basketball games and say things that were so irreverent and so, we'll just say, non-honoring to other people. I would get ejected. And I'll never forget, my coach benched me one time. And I started, and he'll never forget. He said, if you can't figure this out, right, you're done. Like, you're just done playing. And I said, so I smarted off to him too. I'm just kidding, I didn't do that. But I thought about this. I was like, I struggle with this, because when it came to competitive things, or came to anybody I felt like I should feel distance from, honoring just like evaporated. It just wasn't a part of it. And this is what's so fascinating about this. He's writing to a culture, and you know this from 7th grade history class, who at the core of what drove many of these people was this deep competition and distance for the other. A deep competitive nature with people who were brought up this way. Now, we're different because we're a little bit more maybe civilized way we think about it, but you are also competitive with certain people. All right, you're competitive with that mom. You just don't say it out loud, right? You see her and you look her up and down and you just decide something. There's a little bit of that. You're competitive with people at your office or at your work, and you're certainly competitive in your heart and action with people who have caused you pain. Most of the time when someone hurts you, you don't want to just get back at them. More times than not, you want to win. More times than not, it's not like eye for an eye. It's like an eye for your whole head. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of that. Like I used to joke. Anybody have people who do practical jokes on them? Anybody ever seen this before? I used to tell people because I didn't want people to do practical jokes on me. They're like, oh, like I put shaving cream on something. I was like, oh, I keyed your car. You know, like a little bit of that. You know, so there's a little bit of. I'm kidding. I've never done that. But there's a little bit of this where you go like, I don't want to just like be even. I want to win. When I feel competitive with people, I want to win. When somebody, we've talked about this throughout the series, somebody hurts my kids, I don't want to just like, oh, we're even. I want to win. I want you to stop. I want to have won that thing. But you don't say that out loud. You just let it grow in the back of your head and your heart. You don't say it out loud to the person who got the promotion over you. What you do is in the back of your head and the back of your heart. You don't do that. What you do and what I do, come on, you know this, is you allow this thing to just slowly fester and slowly grow. And you don't put words to it. You don't verbalize it. And it just grows. And what Paul is saying is like, look, when it comes to this, you're devoted to one another in love. And you're to honor one another. Who's the other? Yes. All of them. And then he says this, and this is the painful part of it. He goes on, he says, honor one another above yourself, and never be lacking in zeal, or this like protecting your passion and your zeal for other people, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. And then he says things that, again, don't feel like they're connected to this, but they deeply are. He says, be joyful in hope, and then patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, and share with the Lord's people who are in need. And then he says this, practice hospitality. And what's interesting about the early church is that the early church exploded all over the world, not because their checklist was so good, their orthodoxy was so strong, it was like, it wasn't just that. It wasn't that they were just so articulate or ridiculously persuasive. It was that they loved even the other person. They loved the people that were hard to love. They loved the people that maybe didn't love them. And it's like Paul knows the question that they would ask, and the question that certainly I would ask, and probably you, is when you look at all these things, you go, I get that and you fill in your list of people you're comfortable with. But then we all have our list of people that wouldn't make that list. And so what Paul says next is, he says it this way. He says, so just to be clear about who we're talking about, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Live in harmony where the tension that may exist brings about something that's positive. I had to study jazz guitar for a long time in high school, and I did it kind of on my own in early college. I'll never forget this. When I would study this, there was a beautiful harmony even when there was tension involved. Jazz is written for that. Jazz is written to create space for the tension. And he goes like, even in the midst of that, you create harmony even in the midst of the tension, and it is possible and exists. And he says, do not be proud. Or in a way, he's saying like, lay down yourself, lay down your preferences, lay down the stuff that you are owed. Don't be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, and do not be conceited. Now, when you think about this word bless, again, this is like bless your hearts. We say this kind of stuff, or we did where I grew up in South Carolina all the time. You know, there's this like blessing sort of thing, but what Paul is talking about and what Paul is pulling from here with this word is not just like the sweet, hug it out, bless your heart kind of thing. This is like a deep way where you would almost just speak well of another person, to lean in to the relationship, to be a person who does good. Even in this, to want God's best for the other. I put in my notes, I said it this way, and I've asked this question before. I'll ask you this 1,000 times if you attend church here. What would it take for you to be able to pray God's favor over the person who has hurt you the most or the deepest? What would it take? What would it take for you to desire good for the person who has caused you pain? Or the person who doesn't deserve it? Or the person who isn't laying awake at night thinking about how they caused you pain or hurt, but at the end of the day, they might not even know. And yet you're carrying it. And at the same time, you're going, I still desire God's best for them. You know, what Paul says next is the part that I wish I could take out. Like, to be really honest, this would be the part that I would take out. He says it this way. He says, so do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it is possible, and this is the part that's so hard, as far as it depends on you. Like, you can't control the other person. You can't control what they do. You can't control their understanding or misunderstanding of it. You can't control even their thoughts about it. You can't control any of those things. But as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, I'll tell you this, and this is the part that, again, you're a better person than me. I think we've established that as soon as I started talking about getting ejected from basketball games. There's a piece of this where I would say this. As far as it depends on me, is a sliding scale that I like to control, but usually I can do more. Usually, as far as it depends on me, has a wall that is not placed there by God, but is placed there by me, because I don't want to go further. But when Paul is writing and saying, look, as far as it depends on you, as far as it depends on you, to live at peace with people, even those people who persecute you, even those people who have hurt, even those people who do those things, as far as it depends on you, you go as far as you can, continually pursuing peace and right relationship and grace and truth. And then here's like the doozy. This is the thing that Paul says that it's like, so do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. I'm going to say two things around this. This is interesting. It's a part of God that doesn't get talked about enough because we talk about his grace all the time, and he's so graceful. And at the same time, he's also, he's just. And he set up the world in a way where there's consequence and natural consequence, and you know this because if you have a 3-year-old, you know that sometimes you just let them experience natural consequence, you know? Walking in daddy's shoes near fire ants. That's fun. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that. Just kidding. That was just vacation this year. It was fun. There's a little bit of this where you go, like, some of that's a natural consequence. Now, you see this. God actually does, I believe, get engaged in some of those things. I'll never forget being a kid and being wronged at times. And my mom would sit me down and she would go, like, it is not yours to repay. And she'd go, and it is God's to do that. And I'll tell you this, if you're a parent in the room, this is one of the same. When you teach your kids this, and then all of a sudden they begin to experience the world where they see God's love and justice and grace and all of it's like it shapes the heart. Now, the part about this that I would say most adults are good at, including me, is the do not take revenge part. You probably don't take revenge very often, or at least blatantly. Except in your head. Am I right? How many of you, like, be really honest, you're among friends, how many of you this week have had a conversation with somebody else in your head and you won the argument spectacularly? Anybody else other than me? Like, you were like a freaking ninja. You know what I mean? Like a verbal assassin, you know? Like, I think about this a lot. Like, I don't take revenge a lot. I really don't. I'm not wired probably to do it like that. But in my head, I do. I'll be in my car driving around, hurt, and I'd say all the things I wish I would have said in the moment. And I'm wildly articulate. Not in the moment, but wildly articulate then. And you know the satisfaction, come on, be honest, you know the satisfaction you get from winning the argument in your head, or this is even more fun, I don't know if maybe I'll give you something fun to do. Have the argument in your head before you have the argument. You ever done this? Like, if you're married, you know this. Have you ever had a fight with your spouse in your head before you had a fight with your spouse, and then you came into it pre-angry, you know? And then you had the fight, and they're going, what in the heck did I do? I didn't even say anything, but you were ready for those comebacks. And they didn't even say. And there's a piece of this, you go like, I'm good at this. Here's what's fascinating about this. What is happening in your mind and in your heart is this like grip that these things have on you. And they will shape you. They will shape the ways that you respond in the world. They will shape the responses you have with your kids. They will shape the moments that you have with your spouse. What you carry in from the home, from work, and things that you weren't forgiven, like those things, that will shape your experience there. Paul's like, don't take revenge. And I'd go, even in your mind. work hard not to do those things as satisfying as it may feel. Because the satisfaction you feel in the moment does not bring about the life that you were called to live. And then you get this passage that's pretty hotly debated among scholars, which is fun. This is the stuff that I love. Like, what he says next is this. He says, on the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. So I'll tell you, I bring back my mom into this. There was a kid who made we called it tournament team, and more like travel baseball around here. You hear this? But we had like rec league, and then they would pick the best players from there to be on the all-star team, and that was the traveling team, and then from there they'd go on. And what you'd find is every once in a while the coach's sons would make it, but that's why I'm coaching my kid. I'm kidding. But there's a little bit of that. We don't even do it that way here. I'm kidding. But there's that, and I remember a kid that all of my stats were better, and yes, I kept my own stats when I was 11 years old. Like all of this stuff, like I should have been on that team and I didn't make it. And I'll never forget, my mom sat me down, we talked about this, and I'll never forget, I was like, well, if I'm going to do something good, what do I got to do? Do I buy him a glove or cleats just so he feels bad about it? Like, is that what we're trying to do? And I remember being brought up in this way where like when someone treats you bad, you treat them good, but if the guts of it was so that they feel bad. You ever see this? You know? Like this passage was interpreted when I was growing up, and the way that I was taught was like, look, you're going to do good to those people who hurt you. And underlying it somewhere else was so that they feel like crap. You know, there's a little bit of that. And you're like, what? That can't be the way of Jesus. That's just getting back to them in a more subtle way. That's not it. Taking revenge through kindness is like weirdly twisted, you know? And what's fascinating about this, and this is part of the reason it's debated, is the images that he's using here around burning coals are actually like a pull from this Egyptian sort of way of thinking and way of serving one another. It is often lost, I think, in translation. It's actually much more about showing kindness in a way where you're not trying to get something back. You're not trying to increase their guilt by your acts of kindness. That's not what it is. You're trying to build a bridge with them. The heaping burning coals on their head was this image around creating, oddly enough, these bridges and moving through barriers and creating space for people to actually relate. This way of saying, hey, at the end of the day, even though there's this thing between us, I'm going to work to build this kind of bridge to you. As cheesy as this line is, but this is the text, this is what it's talking about. It's like the goal of this like coal thing on the head, the goal of the coal is the heart of the enemy. That you would win the heart of the person who is your enemy and build a bridge, rather than guilt them with your kindness. That my kindness is here to build a bridge to win the heart, not satisfy the person who is offended, which is me. And this is one of those things that's weird and much more about what Jesus did and calls us to. Is that my offense toward other people, my doing in this is not kindness to get guilt or kindness to get back at you. It's much harder. It's building a bridge with someone because I still care about them. That I still choose to love that person. That the heaping the burning coals is not about me subtly getting back at you through being kind. It's about being kind because kindness leads to bridges instead. And you're good with that, except for that person. You're good with that until you feel betrayed, and you're good with that until someone hurts you or hurts somebody you love, and you're good with that until it's harder than you thought it was going to be. And this is where Paul talks about that and almost re-emphasizes and re-ups it. He's like, oh, you don't overcome, you don't have to be overcome by evil. He says it this way. You don't have to be overcome by evil, but you overcome the evil or the brokenness or the pain with good. And not the kind of good and kindness that gets back. You don't weaponize your kindness to get back at someone else. It's so much worse than that. You're kind because that's what you are to do. And you love because that's who we are. And that's what Jesus did for you. I think about this sometimes. I'm on Twitter. Anybody else on Twitter? I'm sorry, I'm on X. Anybody else on X? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? I think about this. The things that we revel in, me too, the things that we entertain ourselves with are the complete opposite of this, right? The things that we enjoy looking at two people fighting. Do we have any Housewives fans in the room? Anybody? Oh, don't lie. I mean, you're in church. Just be honest about it. Come on, yeah. We all watch it. I'm just saying, like, yeah. I always laugh, like, what is the guts of the entertainment? They're crazy. But in the midst of it, it's the tension. Everybody shows up to watch them fight. There are memes created all around this because we enjoy it. Memes in and of themselves are often weaponized in this way. The idea that I could build a bridge with somebody else through kindness is an act of suffering in and of itself. And you don't invite more suffering into your heart. And it's also the same thing that releases the grip of that tension from you. And so when it comes to those areas of our lives where we haven't forgiven or we haven't taken those kinds of steps, the first thing is this, and you know this is not rocket science. I don't think you bypass it. I think you remember it. I don't think you stop remembering it. Sometimes people talk about forgiveness in a way where it's like, oh, you just forgive and forget. Anybody like forgive and forget? Like, you just don't forget though. Miss Sullivan. Anyway, you don't forget, you know? Like, you remember those things. Like, there's a piece of this where you don't forget. What you do have control over, though, is to release. Now, this is the part that I would say feels overly churchy and overly like, of course, that's what you say, and overly like, that's just too buttoned up and tied up, and that's this. Mostly because the idea of releasing something like that typically is talked about as a one-time event, that you did that one time, and now I've forgiven them. We talk about forgiveness as in it's like a past tense of something that I did. But more times than not, it's not like that at all. It's almost like this cyclical, almost sometimes feels unending sense of releasing a debt that they owe you. Like when they hurt you, they took something from you. They took something in terms of time or your emotions. Emily and I talk about this sometimes. I remember I would get upset or hurt during the day, and I would come home upset and hurt. And what it robbed me of, or I was allowing it to rob me of, was presence with my family, right? I felt that it robbed me of that, or seasons of my life of that. And at the core of it, and the guts of it, releasing this is saying, you owe me something. There's a debt that was created in the relationship by a decision that you made. Forgiveness simply says, I release that debt. And then I release it again. And many times again. And this is all within a 3-minute period. So then like 5 minutes later, and sometimes I got to release it again. You know, like there is a continual release of a debt. Come on, you know this. That can never be repaid to you anyway. They can't give you the time back even if they wanted to. They can't unpromote themselves. They're not going to. It's not going to be that. They can't do those things. It's not going to happen like that. I mean, most of you know I grew up in a single-parent home. It took me years to realize my dad can't give me back my teenage years where I get to learn with a man's razor rather than a Venus, right? He can't do that, you know? You're welcome. There's a visual for you. Like, you know, like he can't. Some of y'all are like, that explains a lot of why you have facial hair the way you do. I know, it's great. You got one of those little zzz things now. It's great. Anyway, come on, you can't give back the time. You can't even give back the emotions. And sometimes it was like a physical, tangible thing. It was like, you can't give that back. They can't do it even if they could, or even if they wanted to. And so as long as you hold a debt that can never be repaid, the only person clenching and doing this sort of thing is you. And it's only hindering you. You are only going to be like my son in my shoes, moving a little bit slower. And you can move and you can even be great, but you will never be who God has called you to be as long as you're doing this. You will never be as fast. You will never do the kinds of, you may even do great things, but you will never do what you could have done if you don't continually choose to release the debt. And you're like, well, how often do I got to do that? I have no idea for you. But anytime it comes up, the freeing thing for you, not the other person, the freeing thing for you is to release the debt, because forgiveness cancels the debt that nobody or the other person can't pay. And so here's here's what I have to ask myself this a lot, and the questions are this. Like, what was lost? Like, tangibly, what actually was lost? You need to be very clear about this. You can't release debts that you can't identify what they are. You can't. What was actually lost? The other one is this, and for guys, this is always a fun one because sometimes I don't know. But what do you feel? I told Henry the other night. Henry's like, how are you feeling? And I was like, I feel a little bit tired, a little bit angry, a little bit sad, a little bit excited, really hungry, which is probably what caused all of it. Like a little bit of all those things. I have all, and so the more you can name those emotions, at least you know. At least you know how this triggers your heart. And the last one is, when will you choose to cancel the debt? And so I tell people this all the time because I'm wired like this. I might be the only one, but I say this. I will literally mark in a private calendar that I have on Google Calendar when I'm going to do some of these things. Because sometimes I don't feel ready. Like today, do I feel ready to do this? Or sometimes it bubbles up. But what I'm at least doing by choosing a date, now please don't miss this. Choosing a date to cancel debts that people have you when it comes to relationships lets you know how long you choose to live and whatever bondage it's causing your heart to feel. And the way that I'm wired, it just frustrates me long enough that I feel like I got to do it. But sometimes I'll go like, I'm going to wait a week before I really revisit this and dive into it. And you know what? That's totally okay. As long as you acknowledge that during that week, this is going to have its grip on my heart. And it might bubble up again the next week, and I might go, I can't think about that right now. I'm going to do that later. And it sounds kind of dark, but I'll put it in my calendar. I'm going to think about that then. I'm going to process that then. And it simultaneously does two things. It allows me to know when I'm going to deal with something, and then it also just allows me to acknowledge that for this week, I am choosing that rather than peace in my house, at least what I'm bringing to my house. I at least know that I will intentionally, like my son walked in my shoes, I will do that to some degree as a leader, as long as I choose to hold on to those things. I'm doing that as a husband. I'm at least acknowledging that's how long I'm going to do that thing. And for those of you who are followers of Jesus, let me put it this way. You are at least acknowledging that I'm going to choose to be in control and not invite the supernatural, beyond natural work of the Holy Spirit in my heart to heal something until I'm ready to go like this. And this is not oversimplified when you decide that I might have to do this 100 times, 1,000 times in new iterations. Sometimes forgiveness is like a diamond. Like however you turn it, it's a little different. However you hold that is a little bit different. But it's the most important thing that you'll do, I think, in your relationships. Because forgiveness cancels a debt that other people could never repay. And it is as far-reaching as every other relationship that you're going to have. Now, we're going to wrap up in a second. I want to say two things real quick before we wrap up. Some of you are here, and when I talk about this, what bubbles up in your mind is like abusive relationships, which is a thing, and really painful, traumatic things, which is certainly a thing. Many of you know our story, but like there's abuse in our family, so I came from a family where this was I knew about this, I've seen the effects of it, that sort of thing. And you wouldn't say this out loud because you're nice and you're in church, so you wouldn't say it. But at the end of the day, what you really feel is like the pastor guy talking about this really has no idea, which I totally get. There's probably things that I talk about like this, and I'm like, I don't understand your pain. But I've seen the effects of some of the darkest and deepest things. And you hear a message like this, and it feels oversimplified, in part because the steps that you would need to take to feel like you're releasing something feels so massive. And I get that as much as a person can get that and not be you. But I will tell you this, that the work of processing those steps might be the most important work you ever do. And as oversimplified as it sounds to say, I'm going to release or continue to release or do that, you can choose not to. But if you don't work through those things, and if you don't process those steps to get to that point, come on, you know this, that however much you smile, however good you are at hiding it, however successful you become, it will never release its grip on your heart until you do the hardest work of saying, I'm going to move towards releasing a debt that I can never repay because they can never repay what they took from me. And so I tell people all the time, you should go see a counselor. And guys in the room, like very few guys wake up in the morning like, I'm going to go see a counselor today. That's great. You just don't do it. I get it. But you should. If for nothing else, to say things that you don't feel like you could say out loud to anybody else. I tell people sometimes, I'm like, just go see a counselor for the first three times to swear a lot or something. Whatever you would never say in front of your family, just go do whatever that's going to do, you know? The things that you would never say at work, the things that you would never say to your friends, things that you would certainly never say to your spouse because you don't want to scare them, you know? Whatever it is, like, go say it there. And then after that, see. But until you do the work, the internal heart work of releasing these things, come on, the saddest part is not going to be that you weren't successful because most of you will be. And it's not even going to be that you weren't going to be a good parent because many of you are going to be that, or a great spouse, or a good friend. It's that you will never be what you could have been until you release the debt that other people can never repay. So what we're going to do to wrap up our time is we're going to all confess what those things are. I'm just kidding. We're not going to say it out loud. We're not going to do that. What I am going to do is I'm going to pray for you. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm going to pray for you too. And I'm just going to pray that you take these steps that we've talked about. I think it's really, I don't know that you can fully do it without the work of Jesus in your life because he models this, but I think you can do a lot of work without it. And I hope that you invite him in, even if it's almost like praying to the ceiling fan, which is what I tell people all the time. Like, it might be your last resort, but you may go, hey, at the end of the day, as much as I'm carrying this, if you're up there, I'd love for you to get involved. I think it's a fantastic prayer to pray, even in the midst of it, but I hope you do that. For those of you who are followers of Jesus, what I'm going to pray is that we're able to just move unhindered because we did the hard work in our hearts. So let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for not just telling us this, but for modeling this for us. Jesus, thank you for the life that you lived in perfection, even to death, even resurrection, even the ways that you love and accept us in the midst of our own struggles, and even when we're the offender, God, you give us grace and love there. So pray for the person who no one in here would ever know, but they're carrying like a really deep, heavy weight on this. And I pray that the internal tension that they feel would get to the point where it feels like a boiling point that they have to do something. And I pray that when that happens, God, I pray that they both run to you and that they take whatever steps they need to find for healing. And that when these things bubble up in us, that we really do release those debts. We really do that. And that you would remind us that those are things that can never be repaid anyway. I pray for the person that's here and they hear something like this. And it just is a reminder of the low-grade pain that they feel. And the person who has carried a lot of it for a long time. And I ask, in the midst of their doing all the things, that you would just remind them of how close you actually are. And in the most tangible way possible, that you would give them a beyond natural kind of peace. And as much as we work to heal these places in our hearts through releasing the debts, we also acknowledge that there's a piece of this that only comes from your Holy Spirit moving in us, and we just ask that you would do that. That you would form and you would shape and you would reshape our hearts so that our stories are ones that just point to your redemptive work in our lives.